Shall I start?
Give me a minute. Yeah, we are live. Good evening, folks. Welcome to Geek Night and welcome to the 93rd edition of Geek Night. I hope everyone is doing well. So today's topic will be Blazor, yeah, SPA for .NET families. So today our speaker will be Abdul. He calls himself as Bai, and he will get into those details of Blaze and .NET ecosystem. With no further ado, we'll get started with Abdul. We can share screen. And one other thing, so you can find this video in our YouTube channel, GeekNight Chennai. Apart from that, we have a Q&A box where you can post your questions. Abdul will be taking your questions from there. Cool.
See my screen?
Yeah, Abdul, you're able to see it.
Hello all. Good evening. I'm Abdul Rahman. I'm a senior consultant and developer in ThoughtWorks. I'm a lazy, self-learning young developer who has close to 7 years of experience in developing web applications. I have extensive experience working on a Microsoft tech stack, but that doesn't mean that I don't have any knowledge on front end. I also used to do developments on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So, welcome to my talk. Today, we'll learn about what is Blazor. It's a single page application framework from ASP.NET Core. We'll look on it. You can find my articles on ilvo.net.org. So, let's get started. Blazor is an open source and powerful framework to build a rich and interactive UIs or components using C# instead of JavaScript. But that doesn't mean that it is a replacement for JavaScript. It is just an alternate way to develop web applications using C#. So we'll look on how Blazor was developed and what is the history behind it. 4 years back in around 2014, I started developing web applications. I remember I first started with the ASP.NET Forms, and then I slowly moved to MVC and then to Razor Pages, where we used to develop server-side reusable components using a Razor syntax. And we have other teams who are developing UIs using popular UI frameworks. They used to develop components in the UI side. I used to wonder during those days, like, why not this is possible with the .NET, and I personally was excited when Microsoft announced Blazor. This was something I have been waiting for a long time, and 2 years back they have announced Blazor, and we'll see how they come up with Blazor. It's Steve Sanderson from Microsoft who evolved with this idea. It's like previously in browsers, we used to develop server-based web applications, and that mainly runs using Razor syntax in .NET. And then they thought of this and they extended this idea of running Razor components into the browser. And then we got Blazor as the byproduct of it. So in this today's talk, I'll be covering a few topics, a few inputs on what is Blazor and why we should use it, getting and up and running with Blazor. And then we'll also see what is Blazor Web Assembly. So before we dive deep into what is Blazor or developing web applications with Blazor, I will show you I will show what and how a Blazor application will look like. This is one of the sample Blazor web application. This is built completely using a .NET, C#, HTML, and CSS with little bit of JavaScript. And you can see like it is pretty much fast, responsive. So this is how our Blazor web applications will look like. This is another application. This is just to mock a satellite system, and then I have forked this from Steve Sanderson's GitHub repos. Now let's look into developing rich interactive client-side web applications with Blazor. So before we dive deep into Blazor, I would like to talk about how web application works in general. Like I mentioned, majority of the teams or developers, they used to develop reusable UI components or rich UIs using the most popular front-end frameworks like Angular, React, or Vue.js that runs in the browser. And then in case of any data dependencies with the server, they have some server or backend code that is running in the server, mainly using Java, .NET, or either Node.js. But the fundamental thing that I see here is there is a disconnect between the server and the client side. Like we are not able to reuse the server side logics with the client side logics. Server needs to be developed in a different language, and client side will be developed in a different language. And another drawback here is that sometimes the learning curve of these front-end frameworks are very high, and that is sometimes time consuming. But what if there is a way to develop both front-end and back-end using the same language? And what if we are able to reuse our existing skill sets? There comes Blazor. We can run pretty much any code in the browser. Then that is nowadays possible with WebAssembly. WebAssembly is an open standard with which any code, let it be C# or C++, any code that can be transformed into a bytecode using WebAssembly, and then that can run in the browser. The same way, we can convert our .NET C# code into WebAssembly bytecode, which means that whenever we develop a Blazor application, and the .NET runtime and everything will be transformed to a WebAssembly bytecode, and the Blazor application can run on the WebAssembly, and all this without any dependencies of any plugins like Flash or Silverlight, which we used to have long back. So all things are going to happen in the native browser support, since WebAssembly is an open standard and it is supported in almost all major web browsers, including mobile browsers. And other cool thing is that we are using C# to develop this. C#, which is an great language, and it is evolving, and moreover it is strongly typed, which means that any errors we can figure it out during the compile time and not during the runtime, unlike JavaScript. Whereas in the majority of the web frameworks which run using the JavaScript, which is the scripting language of the web, they are dynamic, and sometimes we end up in runtime issues because of their dynamic natures. We can avoid those using C# and Blazor. So, which means why still do we need to run or prefer going for a Blazor or a C# based browser application? We can run any code using WebAssembly. That doesn't mean that we can run using C#, right? But there are other few advantages. We'll see why we need to go for a Blazor. Like I mentioned, all the complete .NET runtime is transformed into a WebAssembly bytecode, which means that the complete runtime will get executed inside browser sandbox using JavaScript runtime. And since it is majorly supported by all the browsers, including mobile browsers, this is one of the advantages of going with Blazors. And we are using a C#, like I mentioned, it is a strongly typed language, and it has many cool features being added on every year. And with every release of C#, we are having a more and easy way to develop web applications or any language. And another thing is that we are downloading entire .NET into the browser, which means that the complete .NET or any .NET DLL using the server-side NuGet libraries or JavaScript libraries, all these can be reused, and then we can run that in our browser with near native performance. All the things inside browser. We don't need to separately develop anything. We can even reuse our JavaScript libraries or components from different frameworks like React, Vue, or Angular, or even server-side NuGet libraries, all within the capabilities of browser. And performance, like I mentioned, we'll be having a near native performance. And near native performance means whichever code that runs in a browser, and how much faster it can run, it will run in that speed. And it is sometimes overkill for many applications, but there is also use cases like where there is a need for speed. In case of browser-based games or video editing or image processing applications, Blazor outperforms the JavaScript frameworks. And the cool thing is that the tooling and debugging. I have seen this, many of the developers used to complain about the toolings and the debugging whenever a new framework or getting released. But when it comes to Microsoft, we have a great tooling and debugging support, which means we'll be getting all the intelligence and debugging support. And if you compare the toolings available from Microsoft with its competitors, Microsoft's tooling is one of the best, and they are also available for free nowadays. You can start with the free editions. And the other thing, and the other main thing is that this entire thing is backed by Microsoft and an active community of .NET developers. We have Blazors keep on improving, and we have many features coming on the line with the Blazor Hybrid and Blazor Progressive Web App support. Now let's look on. If you are still not convinced to go for Blazor, we'll look on what is Blazor in a moment. And before that, do we have any questions?
Folks, if you have any questions, you can even raise your hands. There's an option called raise hands. We can even unmute you so that you can directly talk to a speaker if you are fine with it.
All right. I'll continue with the talk. And if you are still not convinced about why to go for Blazor, we'll still explore a few things, and that should probably convince you to decide and go for a Blazor. So let's take a Blazor app. Like I mentioned, Blazor app is completely made of HTML and C#. Let's take a component. We can create a component. Blazor mainly depends upon a Razor components and Razor syntax, which means your component will have a mix of HTML, C#. Now that let's assume we have a dialog.razor component, which is made of both HTML and C#, and this is how it looks like. Here you can see there is a button, there's an h1 tag, and the child content. And if you click on button on, when we click on the button, the on is event handler will be triggered, and we can do our logics here. This is one simple component in Blazor, and this component can be nested inside other component like index.razor, so that we have nesting of components. Here you can see like index.razor is developed as a page. Whenever the user lands on index page, you can see hello world getting rendered, and then this dialog component will be rendering. This is what a simple Blazor app will look like. And like we saw earlier, the Blazor application, it will, whenever the Blazor application gets built, then it will generate all the .NET standard libraries. .NET standard libraries are nothing but DLLs that are compatible to run on different platforms. Whenever the application is getting built, it will generate the Blazor related application DLLs, and then all the dependencies like Microsoft Salesforce DLL and system DLL, or whatever things we are using in our application. All these DLLs will be generated, and then they all will run on top of the WebAssembly. WebAssembly will transform these .NET assemblies into a bytecode, and all this will run on top of the JavaScript runtime. This WebAssembly will run on the JavaScript runtime, which means, like I said, WebAssembly runs on top of JavaScript runtime. All these .NET DLLs, they will be named as WebAssembly .wasm files that will bootstrap the Blazor project, and all the Blazor apps will be transformed into WebAssembly code. And then since it is running this .NET runtime, entire .NET runtime is transformed to WebAssembly, and then it is running on top of JavaScript runtime. We have access to all the JavaScript based APIs, like browser-based APIs that are accessible with JavaScript, like WebSockets, Canvas, File API, Web Storage, DOM to update, and also we'll have an access to JavaScript using JavaScript interrupt, which means we can call a JavaScript code from C#, or we can call a C# code from JavaScript. Pretty much cool, right? So great to be a Blazor developer. So far we have seen what is Blazor application. Now let's explore what are all the ways to develop a Blazor application. We can start with Visual Studio, which is available for free in visualstudio.com. You can go and grab the community edition, and you can get started with it. Or you can even use the light version of Visual Studio Code, which is extremely light. You can also use that to develop Blazor applications. It is not that we should always be familiar with IDEs. Sometimes you also need to be familiar with CLI. That is because when we deploy our applications in CI/CD, like the CI/CD environment, we need to get familiarized to work with CLI environment, and we can also develop or create Blazor applications using .NET CLI. So on the first and foremost step to install .NET SDK from .NET website, or if you are going to install Visual Studio, it will comes along with the Visual Studio. So next, you can choose any tool of your choice, let it Visual Studio, Visual Studio Core or .NET CLI, but we'll see on all these three types. So first, if you are going with Visual Studio, we have to make sure you need to enable ASP.NET and development workflow, and then you need to create a simple Blazor Web Assembly project using file new project. Let's see how it works. Like I mentioned, the first thing is that we need to install a .NET SDK, and then you have to make sure you have to install ASP.NET workload during installing the Visual Studio. See this one, ASP.NET and web development, right? This needs to be enabled during installation of Visual Studio. So now let's look on how to create a simple project using Visual Studio. Choose a Blazor Web Assembly application. You have to click Blazor App 1. Next, you can choose the .NET 6 and as it is the latest long-term supported configuration. And then you can enable progressive web app if you want. And the ASP.NET Core hosted is for Blazor server-side application. In this talk, we are going to focus only on web application, web assembly application. So we click on create. So now we got a simple default barebone Blazor Web Assembly application. You can see like it is having CSS and then other static files in the www root and index file, which is the start of the index file, which is the start of the project, where we'll be referring all the static assets, and then we have a blazor.webassembly.js file. This will kickstart the Blazor project, and it will start booting all the related DLLs. We have simple pages and where index page and a simple counter page. Whenever we click on a button, this will increase the counter, and then some chat, where you can see the routing available in this. So that is what this is with the Visual Studio. Now let's see how we can create the same application using VS Code. With VS Code, all we need to do is that we need to install a VS Code C# extension, and then we can use a terminal to generate a .NET new Blazor WebAssembly application. So it's pretty much simple. So, we need to click on the terminal. And we need to select .NET here. Create the required a Blazor Web Assembly template. Let it create. In the meanwhile, I'll show I have installed C# extension. Now you see, we pretty much have the similar files like index.html, which we saw in the Visual Studio. The same thing, but in the Visual Studio code. And the other approach is that we can even develop this with the CLI using .NET CLI, like how we used a built-in terminal in the Visual Studio Code. We can also use it for use command prompt to create same Blazor assembly applications using this. So pretty much we saw the demo of how to create. So you have any questions so far? In case if you want to look at, we'll also use a browser-based Visual Studio development environment. We can activate this whenever you go inside any GitHub repository. You need to press the period key. That will bring the browser-based Visual Studio code, and we can use this to make some small commits or minor commits. You can also use this to do some small fixes. But to make it run with Visual Studio Dev, we need to sign up for code bases from GitHub. So let's not look into that for now. So next, so far we have seen what is a Blazor, and now we'll see what are all the types of architectures available in Blazor. There are two types of architectures available in Blazor. It is Blazor Server Project and then Blazor Web Assembly. Blazor Web Assembly is what we are going to focus on this talk. What is Blazor Web Assembly? It's like inside browser, the entire Blazor app will gets downloaded along with the .NET runtime, and then WebAssembly will transform this into a bytecode, and then it will execute in the browser itself. There is no server dependencies needed. All the things runs completely within the capabilities of the browser. So this will download everything to browser, including the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, .NET DLLs, and dependent DLLs. And then the entire .NET runtime, which will be transformed to bytecode, and it will run on top of JavaScript runtime. I'll show how this works in the upcoming slides. And the main thing with the WebAssembly is that we don't need any server connection, which means we can run this or deploy this without any prerequisites, as it is completely runs on the WebAssembly in all the browsers. We can directly deploy it and we can easily deploy it to any device. And it can also be statically hosted on CDNs, or we can also use servers to host WebAssembly project, or we can use static storage sites from Azure, or you can go with the GitHub pages. GitHub pages are a cool thing which is highly available, and it is free to get started. You can see here like this ilove.net.org. It is hosted using GitHub pages, and then it is completely built using a Blazor WebAssembly. Like I mentioned, the benefits of going for a Blazor WebAssembly is that near native performance. When it comes to video editing or a heavy CPU intensive work or graphic processing, this will give the best performance compared to the available JavaScript frameworks, and it can work offline. We don't need any server. Once everything is downloaded to the browser, it can be executed within the browser. You don't need to have an online connection, and no server-side technology is needed. There are no server dependency. We don't need to depend on any servers unless for data downloading or for other steps. And it uses it as it runs completely inside browser. It uses all the client-side resources, which is most of the cases which have been underutilized by majority of the projects. But here the Blazor completely utilizes all the resources available in the browser. That is an added advantage. And then it runs on all the modern browsers, including mobile browsers. And the downsides of going with the Blazor WebAssembly is as it runs on the browser, it still gets restricted to the capabilities of the browser, and browser does all the work, which means all the things needs to be downloaded, and all process browser. And since browser is doing all the work, it depends upon the device that we have. If we have a device with less power, CPU power, and then it will be slower on those devices. And if you have a device with a good CPU power, then it will be very faster. So these are all the downsides. And The more we have and the larger the time it takes to download, and it sometimes gives some loading or like it may give the user a slow experience. And but these downsides are overcome with other features available in Blazor, like pre-rendering and lazy loading. AOT is to improve the performance. AOT will increase the download size, but it improves the performance size. We can still reduce the load time by using lazy loading or pre-rendering, which will give a consistent loading effect. And then since everything runs in the browser, maintaining client-side secrets will be a difficult thing. Even though we encrypt and use it in the browser, it is still not a safe way. Everything can be exposed or accessed from the browser. And the big drawback is that WebAssembly is required. If any browser is not supporting WebAssembly, then that's it. We cannot run Blazor WebAssembly. But how can we overcome this? In these cases, we can go for a server-based WebAssembly project, server-based Blazor projects. There is another architecture available in Blazor, and that with that we can overcome this WebAssembly dependency. It's like it is same like a WebAssembly project, but everything runs on the server, and then there should be an active internet connection between a signal or connection between the server and the browser. Only the UI difference will be sent from the server back to the browser. Here in with the Blazor server, we have all the capabilities, and the code completely runs on the server instead of running on the browser. But the drawback is that we need to have an active internet connection. So time to look into some of the demos. I'll show. Let's inspect and see how it goes. So let's go to network tab. Let's clear the site data. Let's see. So network. See, as we saw in the slides, this will develop almost all the required DLLs and the dependencies. You can see the Microsoft ASP.NET Core DLL or any other NuGet packages that we have added to the project. And then the shared modules and system dependency, system DLLs, everything. And this project Blazor Application DLL, everything will be downloaded to the browser. And this Blazor dot, where is the file?
Folks, Abdul, we have a message that they're having some audio issues. I'm able to hear fine. What about others? Okay.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, like I was able to hear Abdul, like we can have a message from our participants. Okay, it's working fine, it seems. Great. Yes, please continue.
I'll repeat this once again. Like we saw in the slides, all the required DLLs will be downloaded into the browser. And the dependent DLLs will be downloaded into the browser. It's like a complete .NET runtime. And this .wasm file, let's see, .wasm file. Yes. Okay. So like here we see all the required assemblies will be listed here in this file, and this file boot.json will take care of loading all the assemblies, and we can also lazy load the assemblies which can be activated based on the route. It is not necessary to load all the assemblies during the initial app load. This is to reduce the app's download size, and it will increase the startup time. Like we have these assemblies that will be lazy loaded whenever we go inside any blog. Now that I have moved into an article, so those related DLLs are lazy loaded. this will not be loaded on the initial index page load, and once it is loaded, the browser will reuse of this, and we don't need to download it again. So this is with, then I have also showcased this. This is a satellite simulator app. Let's see what is the benefit of going for ahead of time compilation. Right now, everything will be downloaded into the browser, and then here the transformation from .NET runtime to WebAssembly bytecode happens. The same happens with the AOT disabled. Let's try to see this application. If you see, this is again, I repeat here, it is a fork from Steve Sanderson's GitHub repo. So we'll try to mention 60 FPS frames per second by increasing the count here. Let's see. Let's make it 1000. With 1000, we are able to maintain 60 frames per second. Let's increase it to 5000. We're still able to maintain 75 to 60 frames per second. We'll make it to 7000. Oh, it is okay. We'll make it to 10,000. It's okay. We'll make it 15,000. Okay, there is a dip, but still it is close to 60. Let's make it 20,000. With 20,000, it is dipping away from 60 frames per second. So this is with the AOT disabled. When we go with AOT enabled, again I have used GitHub's pages to deploy and use Blazor application for this demo. We will see the AOT enabled version. With AOT enabled, what happens is that the entire .NET runtime will be transformed into bytecode during the publish, and no transformation will happen in the browser. And with this, we don't need to rely on the browser, and then the no transformation happens in the browser, and we can get some extra performance here. We'll first try to make it 1000. It is still maintaining 60 frames per second. We will go with 5000. Still 60 some. Okay, now we will make it 7000. Good, it is at 60. Okay, let's make it 10,000. Still checking with 11,000, 15,000. It is 350 frames per second. I think for 15,000 with the AOT disabled, it got dropped away from 60, right? We will try to increase it further more. Let's increase it to 20,000. Even with 20,000, we are still having, we are able to maintain 60 frames per second. We will increase this to 30,000. 30,000, we are still able to maintain. Let's increase to 50,000. Wow, with 50,000, we are able to maintain. Let's increase it to 1 minute. With this, we see a dip in the 60 frames per second. So this is the power of higher uptime compilation, and this is also another benefit for going with WebAssembly. If you are having a CPU intensive work or graphic processing or image processing or video editing or browser based games, going with Blazor WebAssembly and then doing an AOT compilation will give you an extra performance. And also with another advantage is that we can reuse not only .NET based libraries, we can also use libraries from JavaScript frameworks or from the C++ code or any server code that can be transformed to WebAssembly bytecode, and it can be run along with the Blazor. So these are all the things with the Blazor. Let's have a quick summary of what we have learned so far. Blazor is a single-page application framework from ASP.NET Core family, and it is used to develop rich interactive web UI with C#, HTML, and CSS. It is built on web open standards using WebAssembly, which means we don't need any dependencies like Flash or Silverlight. It uses Blazor components. Our components will have a mix of C# or HTML. We can reuse existing NuGet libraries or JavaScript libraries as long as within the capabilities of browser, and WebAssembly is supported by all the modern browsers. Again, I repeat, including mobile browsers. And to develop Blazor applications, we can use Visual Studio, VS Code, or .NET CLI, and that depends upon our interest. And Blazor Web Assembly, it runs on the WebAssembly, and you can also use it, run it from the server, or it can be run completely from the browser. No need to depend on server. It can be hosted on CDNs, and it gives a near native performance, and we can make it to work offline, and better performance compared to other JavaScript libraries in case of browser-based games or image processing, video editing. So, I hope I have convinced all of you on why to go for Blazor and what is Blazor. Now that you must have a clear idea on what Blazor is, and we are open for discussions. Question and answers. I will look at the question and answer section. Chat. We can speak a little on the performance difference between JS and Blazor. Shravan, for your question, like I mentioned, we just saw here, right? Using with Blazor WebAssembly, if it is going to be a CPU intensive application, or if you're going to develop apps that consumes more of a CPU power, then going for Blazor WebAssembly is better compared to JavaScript based frameworks. Let's try to add a 0 here, and let's see what happens. We are still able to make it work. So that's cool, right? So and also with the bare minimal Blazor application, Blazor Web Assembly application will be it's less than 2 MB, which means entire .NET running in the browser, and it is also less than 2 MB. If you have a trimming enabled, and trimming enabled, it will be around 1.2 MB. The minimal application will have 1.2 MB, which means the entire running in browser for 1.2 MB. Cool, right? And I have another question from Paul Tomar. Will it have a performance impact with downloading .NET runtime DLLs on initial load or for larger apps? Okay, so to answer that question, we have to be a little bit smart here. Like we should not load all the assemblies on the initial load. We can make use of lazy loading, and then we can load on demand. When the user visits the particular part of the website, we can load the required DLLs on demand. And to avoid showing a loader, we can also use a pre-rendering. ASP.NET has a built-in, like now that there is a discussion going on bringing a pre-rendering during the publish time. Instead of right now, we have a pre-rendering enabled with the server-side Blazor project. Like the entire page will be pre-rendered, and then it will be displayed, given back to the browser, so that the user will have an eventual feel of the page getting loaded. But now there is also another discussion going on bringing pre-rendering during publish time itself. Instead, so which means you don't need to depend on the server side part of the .NET code. So hope that answers your questions. So do you have any other question?
Meanwhile, like I'm sharing a link for the feedback. It will be really great if you can share your feedbacks with us, so that it will be really helpful for the speaker and for GeekNight for improvements.
I'm sending the answers for the questions in the chat. Let me just type it quickly.
Great. So we have a question here from YouTube. Like I'm sharing it in the chat, Abdul. If the WebAssembly running in the browser contains the entire app code, is there a security concern?
We can encrypt like security concern, like we are not able to hide the secret. That is one of the concerns that is going in the Blazor WebAssembly. We can encrypt it, but still it can be taken from the browser. And in that case, if you are worried about security, then you should consider going for Blazor server side instead of Blazor WebAssembly.
So,
6:45.
cool.
Do you have any other questions? Then you can read my articles on ilo.net.org. I'm authoring many articles using Blazor, and that ilo.net is completely built using Blazor WebAssembly, and it doesn't have any server dependency, and it is hosted on GitHub pages. You can reach out. You can reach out to me in LinkedIn in case of if you have any questions. And Shakti, so it's good to end up, or we can.
Yeah, okay, the form seems to be restricted at the organization level. Okay, my bad. Maybe I'll enable it in like 2 minutes, post this once we close this talk.
I have another question in the Q&A section. It is Dhruv Patak. He is asking about Blazor Hybrid. Blazor Hybrid, I think it is still in the development stage. I'm also following that in the Microsoft community. With Blazor Hybrid, the advantage is that you can develop a Razor components like we do a normal component development, and that can be run in a Blazor WebAssembly or Blazor server, or in your MVC app, or in any Razor Pages app. You can even publish those components, Razor class libraries as a NuGet package, and you can consume it directly from Blazor desktop applications. That is the cool thing about Blazor Hybrid. This component, one code base that can run in a Blazor browser, desktop apps, and even now in the next quarter, Microsoft is planning to release MAUI, multi-platform app UI. You can also use these Blazor components in that multi-platform app UI, which means one code base and one component, and it can run in web, mobile, desktop, pretty much everywhere. You don't need to spend some efforts, and you can reuse your C# skills, or you can save time. So that is the cool thing with Blazor. Hope that answers your question. That answer the chat also.
If we have a person who's raising their hands. Yeah, Dhruv, I have given permission to talk. You can unmute and talk. Dhruv, if you're talking, you are still on mute.
I'm not able to hear anything, Shakti.
You're not able to hear me?
No, I can able to hear you. I think Dhruv is on mute.
Yeah.
Dhruv, can you unmute yourself, please? Am I audible to you, Shakti?
Yeah, Abdul, I'm able to hear.
Okay.
Okay, fine then.
I have answered Dhru's question in the chat as well. Maybe he might have forgot to lower his hand. He might have raised, and he might have forgot to lower his hand. We'll see.
Cool then. We don't have any more questions.
Okay. So, well done. Feel free to reach out to me in case of any queries regarding Blazor. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, or you can find my details from myloop.org, and you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining the session.
And thanks for the wonderful talk, Abdul. I hope like it was informative for everyone. And thanks everyone for joining. You'll be able to find this video in our YouTube channel. Please do share it with your circle. And please do like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Thank you, folks. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.